If you were to listen to voices in alternative media over the weekend, you would have likely heard that Mexico is descending into civil war. This is Mexico City. Oh my gosh, the government of Claudia Sheinbaum is collapsing. This is the end of Claudia Sheinbaum. This is the end of this corrupt government. There's a revolution happening right now. Massive protests that are tearing the government down. It's a revolution. They're telling us an uprising, a color revolution also we heard this weekend, but that doesn't seem to be the case at all when you listen to actual journalists like Derrick Broze who live and work in Mexico. Here's Derrick covering some of that news this weekend following the protesters and the assassination of Carlos Manzo, who was the mayor of Uruapan. Watch.
Hola a todos, soy Derrick Broze con Resistencia Consciente, and I am here in Morelia, Michoacan, Mexico, where there's a protest going on right now against violence. Last week, there was an assassination of a local mayor in Uruapan, 2 hours away.
Sí, pues ella tiene la fortuna de que todo este año va a estar ahí participando, entonces, mira, aquí.
And of course, that was the moment when the mayor of Uruapan was assassinated. Independent journalist Derrick Broze joins us from Morelia, Mexico, to talk about what's really going on there. Derrick, great to have you here. I wanted to have you on because you're able to cut through all the bullshit and give us the truth about what's actually happening there. President Trump, just about 30 minutes ago, was asked about it, said very bad stuff, what's happening in Mexico City. He'd be open to bombing Mexico as part of, stopping the flow of drugs. So we're hearing color revolution. We're hearing that the government is collapsing. What is actually happening?
Yeah, thank you guys for giving me a chance to try to cut through it. Like you said, Clayton, there's a lot of misinformation going on this weekend. And I hate to say it, but if you were to do a search using any mainstream search engine like Google about what happened this weekend, the mainstream is a bit more accurate than a lot of people in the alternative media, particularly those on Twitter who have been claiming civil war, revolution. I've heard everything from this was an uprising against the communist Chinese-backed president to it's all fake. And then, of course, the administration, they have their own theories. But I think the reality is a bit closer to what you said a moment ago, that this was a movement that was really largely sparked by that assassination of Carlos Manzo, which happened on the Day of the Dead, November 1st. And people, especially the younger generation, who are growing up with phones in their hands and can see what life is like in other countries, are increasingly sick of the cartel violence, which unfortunately, the state that I live in, Morelia in Michoacan, it is one of some parts of the state are one of the more dangerous areas of the country, Western Michoacan, which is where Uruapan's at. And it's important for people to understand that Carlos Manzo, he ran independently. So he was not a part of the Morena party, which Claudia Sheinbaum's a part of, or any of the opposition parties. He was an independent candidate for mayor, and he won by a landslide last summer in Uruapan, and he was put into office in September. And he was openly saying he was going to do something about cartel violence. He was actually riding along with the local police, going on these ride-alongs and confronting cartel members. He was also kind of taking some controversial stances, saying that the Mexican people should be allowed to arm themselves, and also saying that cartel members, people who are perpetrators of this violence, should be shot and killed on sight. Claudia Sheinbaum was speaking against him and saying this is not the way we want to go. And he repeatedly asked for the federal government to send more troops and more help to Uruapan and toward that part of Michoacan. And unfortunately, for the most part, his requests were denied. And as that video you showed a moment ago showed, on the Day of the Dead, November 1st, even though he was surrounded by some armed police officers, he was shot and killed. And that led to massive protests the next day on November 2nd here in Morelia, where people stormed the governor's palace, and they did, there was some violence. Of course, like typically, the majority of the protest was peaceful. There was a few people who broke in and committed violence. And then from that led to another call for protest on November 15th, which we saw this weekend. So all of that preceded everything that happened this weekend. And I think that's a lot of the context that people are missing. And unfortunately, people who are maybe just out for clicks are promoting this as this revolution, this civil war, when the protest lasts for a couple hours and then life went back to normal in Mexico.
Because they don't really have the power to affect any change. What is President Sheinbaum's position, against the cartel? It's like get along to go along seems really her policy.
She's continuing the policy of her predecessor, which is AMLO, who was part of the same party. And he was very popular despite his unpopular stance on the cartels, which was hugs, not guns. That was sort of the motto that he had. And essentially the reason his party has taken that stance in the past years, and Sheinbaum is continuing it, is because the presidents before them, Vicente Fox and others, they took a more hardline approach, you might say, and it did lead to more violence across Mexico. So there are many people who believe, look, the strategy of taking on the cartels head on is not, it's not going to work. It's just going to lead to more violence. So even as these protests were happening, Claudia Sheinbaum was like, I'm sorry, Carlos Manzo was killed, but his approach was wrong. We need to be, they say that the way they want to go is we need to invest in the people. We need to make sure people, like the youth especially, have resources so that they don't get pulled into the cartels. And I can understand that, that mentality that, give more support for the people, many of whom are in poverty. And of course, when poverty happens, poverty can breed desperation, and that desperation can mean, well, maybe I have a better life in the cartel, or the cartels use that poverty as a way to recruit young people, including the reports say that it was a 17-year-old meth addict who's the one who actually killed Carlos Manzo. And some believe acting on the behalf of the Jalisco New Generation cartel. So that's her approach, is like, let's invest in the people. And again, I could understand that, but the criticism is basically that this is just an excuse, because there are many people who believe the Morena party and Claudia Sheinbaum are deeply linked to the cartel, and this is just them, protecting their partners.
If you've been seriously injured, your case could be worth millions, and you should know exactly what your rights are. That's why I want to tell you about Morgan & Morgan. They're America's largest injury law firm with over 1,000 attorneys working in all 50 states. And unlike a lot of firms that settle quickly, Morgan & Morgan doesn't take lowball offers from insurance companies. Just in the past few months, they won $12 million in Florida when the insurance company offered only $350,000. And in New York, they secured $6.8 million on a case where the offer was just $275,000. And the best part? It's absolutely free unless you win. Insurance companies try to pay out as little as possible. Morgan & Morgan fights to get you more if you become their client. It only takes a few minutes to see if you have a case, and you can do it right from your phone. It's that easy. You can visit forthepeople.com/redacted, or you can click the link in the description to get started. Any truth to the idea that there's a color revolution, some sort of a revolution backed by maybe the United States? Then you have President Trump today coming out and being asked specifically about it, saying how bad things are in Mexico City. He would be happy to bomb Mexico if it involved drugs coming into the United States. He said that. So, would the United States be backing any kind of a regime change operation? We've heard those rumors this weekend as well.
So at the moment, there's no other figure who has kind of stepped up like we see in Venezuela. Somebody saying, hey, I'll replace Maduro if you get rid of him. That doesn't exist at the moment, but obviously there are other opposition parties to the Morena party. But again, some more context people need to understand is that over the last year, the Morena party has, obviously they have control of the presidency. They have largely the control of the military, the National Guard. But earlier this summer, there was also a big vote which was promoted as to give the people more power. The people are going to have the ability to vote on judges. It was the first time in the country's history that people will be able to elect the judges. And it was largely seen, though, as a ploy by the Morena party to sort of say, hey, you have more freedom, but in reality, for them to get all of their own people into these judges' positions so then they could effectively get control of the courts. That law did pass, and many people believe now Morena and their allies are in control of the courts. So Claudia Sheinbaum, as far as this color revolution idea, she tried to portray the idea that this alleged Gen Z protest was really being perpetrated by some of her political enemies, namely this billionaire Salinas, who has TV companies behind him, and he's got a lot of wealth behind him. She was saying that it was just him tied to international right-wing figures that are trying to take her down. So there's that sort of theory coming from the government. And another theory that I think we should keep an eye on is this idea that what we're witnessing in many parts of the world, not just Mexico, but Nepal more recently, Indonesia, the Philippines, that there are these Gen Z protests that are popping up, which, again, I think people are legitimately upset about different things in their home countries. But one of the things you start to see is this Jolly Roger, or it's called the One Piece flag. It's the skull and crossbones with a little straw hat. And not to get too deep in the weeds, but it comes from an anime comic. And people say that it's a symbol of the people standing up against tyranny. but it also is making some people sort of say, why is this symbol potentially organically, potentially not organically, popping up in countries all around the world, at protests all around the world? And there definitely was a big presence of that flag in Mexico. There was a giant flag that some of the protesters had rolled out. And in my own travels and interviews I've done here in Morelia, talking to the younger generation, I'd see some of them wearing that flag on pins or on their backpacks and things like that. It could be a case that this symbol is just because of the internet, it's traveling quickly and widely, and people are truly seeing it in other protests and saying, hey, let's adopt that symbol. But because of the color revolutions we've seen in the past, where different colored flags, the orange revolution, the pink revolution, seem to pop up, and we later learn, okay, there was somebody who was trained by the CIA or trained by NED or USAID, it is causing some people to wonder, like, is that happening in other countries in the world? And is it now starting to make its way to Mexico? But for me personally, I don't think we have solid evidence of that. And again, when I talk to the Mexicans on the ground here, because I've been here 5 years, I'm not born and raised in Mexico, but my family is from here a few generations back. The young generation is just sick of it. They don't want to grow up and accept the idea that the cartel violence and this connection between the cartels and government is the norm. And then just one other thing that I think we'd be remiss not to mention is the fact that we know without a doubt, there's numerous books on this and some great reporting you can find from Covert Action magazine showing that, for example, the Jalisco New Generation cartel, some of their ex-members have said that they were trained by U.S. Special Forces, that they were trained by former Marines. And so there's this whole other aspect, especially with what Trump is saying now, of whether or not these cartels did receive funding and still do receive funding from U.S. interests, and if some of the violence is instigated in order to give the U.S. the reason to say, hey, we need to go in there and invade Mexico, much like what we're seeing in Venezuela.
Yeah, we would never do that, right, Derrick? We would never do that, whether it's in, God knows, Ukraine or Hamas or Al-Qaeda or in Syria.
Yeah.
We don't have any history of doing that, actually working with the guys, giving them, arming them, and then say, hey, how'd you guys get those guns? Let's attack you. So
maybe can you give us a parallel that we might be able to understand what the Jolly Roger symbolizes for people who are sincere about, I mean, it very well could be a deep state plant, but what do people who wear it think that it means? Can we make a parallel to like the Groiper frog? Or not really? It
could be something like that. I think maybe a more apt comparison would be, say, the Guy Fawkes mask during Occupy Wall Street in that sort of era, the 2010s, right, where it becomes this symbol that people pick up and wear all around the world. I think that can happen organically, especially again in the age of the internet, where even in a small town in Mexico, somebody's got their phone, they got TikTok, and they can see what's happening in other countries, and they could say, hey, maybe we want to adopt that. Now, I'm not a manga, anime, comic book fan, so I had to do research to learn about One Piece, but some of my friends I know are well versed in that. And it is basically the story of these pirate kind of rebels who believe in freedom, and occasionally, they're rebelling against some authority figures. So it does have that little bit of kind of mythology to it, and I could see how that could translate, especially for the younger generation, to a symbol that could become powerful and useful in that way. Like with most things, I doubt most of the people who are waving those flags and holding them understand that sort of deeper meaning behind it. They might just adopt it because, well, that's what the movement's doing. But yeah, I think it's comparable to things we've seen with the Guy Fawkes mask and some of these other type of symbols. Now, we'll have to wait and see in the coming months if it does lead to, not only in Mexico, but to elsewhere. Maybe we will be seeing in the coming months this Jolly Roger, this One Piece flag sweeping countries around the world. If that does happen, I will definitely be very skeptical of where things are headed. But again, I just want to reiterate that these things can both happen. There can be both an effort for outside forces, whether it's right-wing interests tied to the Atlas network, like Claudia Sheinbaum is saying, or the CIA or somebody else with the Jolly Roger flag. That can be happening. And at the same time, Mexicans on the ground and Philippine people and elsewhere can genuinely be upset about the conditions that are happening, because there are rising costs of inflation, especially in Mexico. There's a lot of people who don't feel like there's any hope for their future. I mean, that's kind of prominent in Gen Z around the world. So I think that from my view, it is a disservice to the people who are trying to fight for a better life to just say, oh, well, that's just color revolution. Oh, that's just, fake engineered thing. I'm not going to give it any credit or any value. And even for myself, I would say the same thing about the No Kings protest. I don't agree with everybody who was involved in that or all of their issues by any means. But I think to dismiss movements like that and just say, well, it was all funded completely by George Soros and everybody gets a check or something, then that diminishes the people who have legit concerns about where things are headed. Again, with the caveat that I don't have to agree with all of their issues, including here in Mexico, where some of the protesters are waving communist flags, which I don't agree with. But I can also empathize with them and understand, like, okay, they have concerns, whether we agree on the solutions. These are genuine people of all ages who are worried about where their country is headed.
Yeah,
Right.
I feel the same way about MAGA. Like, look, Donald Trump has basically thrown up down the pipeline, but it meant something to them. They believed that he was a punk disruptor, even though he hasn't been. And so you can't demean someone's intentions to reach for a movement that they think is disruptive, no matter what form that takes.
And you also can't discount what Derrick was just saying, which is that a lot of times these infiltrators, these USAID, the CIA, these sort of ne'er-do-wells, these funders, the George Soros funding and so forth, they co-opt these movements, which in many ways are organic. You know, like these people are fed up with the cartel violence. They don't want their government controlled. And then here comes these George Soros co-opted with pre-printed signs and agitators to kind of just jump inside of it and be a part of it, and in many ways undermine it, which is what I hope is not happening here. Derrick, great.
So sad.
It does, but bottom line, Derrick, no civil war is happening as alternative.
I posted on my Twitter last night because this month in Mexico is Buen Fin. It's kind of like the Black Friday. So the malls are filled with people shopping. I was out couch shopping last night. Life is going about normal. You can go look at the live feed of the Zocalo, the center of Mexico where the protests were. Yesterday was a giant dance with thousands of people. In fact, more people at this dance than there were at the actual protest. Life is going about as normal. Yes, there are these problems happening, but to anybody out there that's hearing on their social media feeds that there's a civil war erupting, revolutions happening because of these clips you saw on Saturday, you're being misled. Life is going about as normal. And I don't think the movement to push back against the cartel violence is going away, but life is generally happening as it does every day.
But no civil war. But thank you for cutting through the BS on this and the propaganda. Derrick, always great to see you. Where can people follow your work? You do incredible work.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Yeah, my main place for all my work is theconsciousresistance.com, including that report you showed earlier. If anybody wants to see the full report about what's been happening here in Morelia with the violence and the cartel. And I am going to be doing more reporting on this, including probably making a trip to Mexico City to just see where things are headed. So thank you guys for giving me a chance to share what's going on.
Yeah.
Well, great. We'll have you back when you're in Mexico City as well. So thank you.
Also, we're working on a piece together. He's going to be back in December when Avatar comes out because he has research showing how government agencies are behind Avatar. So before you get excited about that, and that's in your documentary.
The Pyramid of Power.
Yes, thank you. The Pyramid of Power. So I'm looking forward to talking about that.
People can find that at thepyramidofpower.net.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll see you again soon.
Thanks, Derrick. Great to see you.